Greetings. I haven't done a music review for a few years. I don't tend to do them anymore, but I was compelled to do one from a release that came out yesterday, one of the most exciting releases for a while, and that is Pink Floyd's Animals has been remixed. It was remixed in 2018. It's now 2022, and it's been released. It was released yesterday. So this is a review. What do I think of Pink Floyd Animals 2018 remix? So, I'm not a big fan of remixes necessarily. I've bought remixes in the past and haven't really noticed that much difference in the original compared to the original. In some circumstances, I've heard remixes that aren't even as good as the original. So, I'm not really a fan of remixes. For some reason, I don't notice a lot of difference. So, I don't tend to value remixes that much. However, last year I heard Pink Floyd MomentaryLapse of Reason album, which was remixed. So I put that on and I was very surprised. Firstly, the sound quality was completely different. There was a lot more clarity. So if we go back to the 80s, 1987, 88, MomentaryLapse of Reason was released in 88. And when it was released, they spent so much money and put so much effort into their sound production that it was basically a work of perfection in 87. It was incredible. It's the best recording you could possibly get. But then as time went by and we go into the 2000s, I listened to MomentaryLapse of Reason a few years ago and I was like, this used to sound really good. Now it sounds dated. It's got that very thin sort of digital 80s sort of sound to it. It doesn't sound any good. It's got that hissy sort of 80s graininess. But when I heard the remix last year, it was way better. It was a lot better. But the other thing that they did that I really loved, no bands ever do this, but Pink Floyd did, is they toyed with it a little bit. So there was a drum fill that they replaced with a different drum fill. So obviously in the 80s, they did several takes of a drum fill. They decided to use a different drum fill. They put the digital samples, if you've got singing or talking of a sample, they put it in a different spot where it's unexpected. You're like, hang on, there's normally this happens here. Oh, it's happening here. They put surprises in. On the Turning Away, the song On the Turning Away, they used a completely different vocal track. So the lyrics were the same, the singing was the same note, but you could tell it was a different take. And I really love that. Some people complained because it wasn't authentic, the original. They kind of toyed with it, which I loved. Because when you listen to an album for that long, I've been listening to it since 1987. It's nice to hear it reimagined and hear surprises and hear unexpected things. I like that. You can always listen to the original if you want. They didn't toy to it where they ruined it. They just toyed it where it's enough to keep you interested, which I love. That's one thing I loved about MomentaryLapse of Reason. So let's talk about Animals. Animals is an aggressive album. It's one of the more aggressive albums, probably the most aggressive Pink Floyd album. It's got long songs. The second song's almost 20 minutes long. Then you're followed by two 10-minute songs. So they're very long. But one of the things that's kind of unique about Animals is I'm used to listening to long pieces. I listen to classical music. I listen to prog rock. So I'm used to listening to long pieces that take you on journeys and have lots of different transitions and lots of things going on. Animals is quite repetitive. It doesn't have a lot of transitions. It has more longer jams that are repetitive. However, it doesn't feel repetitive. It's they managed to jam in a way that's interesting enough that it still takes you on a journey, even though the same theme is going, which I don't encounter that very often. Usually when a band is repetitive, I get bored with it easy. But somehow in Animals, they managed to make it very, very interesting. I dare say some of that has got to do with the keyboard playing. Richard Wright's keyboard playing. He offers a lot of variation and little interesting things with the keyboard. So potentially it's got a lot to do with the keyboards. But if we go to the remix, now the first thing I was a bit disappointed with was the fact that they didn't toy with it. Potentially here and there, maybe one or two spots, they've put a little variation in there, potentially. It's hard to tell. But it was essentially identical to the original. So I was a little bit, I know fans will be happy with that, but I wanted more surprises. I like surprises. I was hoping they'd muck around with it a little bit more, which they didn't. So that's the thing I didn't like. However, the positives of this release compensate for that. And that is the sound quality. So the original release of Animals, it's very, it's kind of it's a bit claustrophobic. It's a bit claustrophobic. It's a little bit foggy and claustrophobic. Whereas this one is very open and there's a lot of clarity. You can hear everything. You can hear things that are going on. You can hear things that you don't notice in the original. You can hear a lot of things that you don't notice in the original. The sound quality of the Animals released yesterday compared to the original is like night and day. It's vastly, vastly different to the original. It's a lot more better. There's a lot more clarity. There's a lot more lower frequencies. This is a true story. When I was listening to the third song, which is Pigs, there's a jam session in the middle. They go to this jam session bit, and halfway through, I heard this really low rumbling outside. I thought, well, what's that? And I stopped the music. I looked outside. I was expecting to see like a semi-trailer dragging some piece of concrete or something. It was just a rumbling, like train rumble sound. And I looked outside. I didn't see anything, so I put the music back on. I heard it again. I turned the music off, and I had a look, and I'm like, what is that? And I almost was like, hang on a minute. I rewound the music. I played it again. I realized it was the recording. There's this big low frequency rumble in Pigs that I've never heard before. It's just, and I haven't even heard it in music before. It's such an incredible auditory rumble. Very interesting. Yeah, it was very interesting. It just sort of demonstrated the extent that they went to remix this. I will say as well, the fact that the original recording isn't like this yet is one of my favorite albums. Pink Floyd Animals has always been in my top 5 at least favorite albums of all time. Is a big testament to their songwriting, especially Roger Waters' songwriting and their musicality. The fact that they can release something that does sound claustrophobic but is still one of my favorite albums of all time is testament to their songwriting and their musicality, which is why Pink Floyd as a rock band is one of the best ever. One of the best ever. Will be remembered as one of the best rock bands ever. So what I will say again about the Animals remix is the drums, that you can hear things that you couldn't hear before. They're a lot more brought to the front. There's a lot more stereo separation. When he goes around the toms, there's a lot more going, like you can hear things a lot better. It sort of pops out at you where before it didn't. The bass playing, again in Pigs. Pigs is a very sort of funky bass orientated song, and you can hear the bass very loud, very low frequency. It's got a very low frequency, which really brings a lot to the music. The vocals have been lifted up. The vocals are right at the front there. So much clarity and definition right in your face with the vocals. Even the backing vocals, David Gilmour's backing vocals was normally in the original was kind of like in the background. It's been brought right up to almost as loud as the main vocal track, where it really kind of gives a different impression of the song. It's incredible listening to something like that. I love it. The keyboards have definitely been brought right up. There's no mistake that with the keyboards, there are things you simply cannot hear in the original that you hear in this one because they've been brought up so much. The guitar playing. What's the song? It's either Dogs or Pigs. I think it's Pigs. David Gilmour plays these slow chords and there's an echo effect on it, and there's other things that he does that you don't hear in the original because it's been brought up. There's so much clarity going on. You can hear stuff that you don't notice in the original. So I mean, I don't have much else to say about the album. Besides Sheep, the song Sheep, it starts out with the Rhodes keyboard. In the original, it sounds like more of a volume swell, but it is a modulation, like perhaps a Leslie or something like that. In the original, you don't hear much of the modulation. It's more of a volume swell. So there's a keyboard playing with a volume swell. In this version, you really hear the stereo modulation going on. So you can hear the Rhodes keyboard with all this stereo going around like this, and then the bass gently throbbing coming up. Oh, wow. Yeah, what an experience. Fantastic album. If you're a Pink Floyd fan, particularly if you like the album Animals, in my opinion, this is one of the most exciting album releases I've seen for a while.